We have been listening to Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking at a steel facility in Hamilton, Ontario. In his remarks, he announced supports for the industry now facing 50% tariffs from the United States. Now, Carney says the Canadian industry has become too dependent on the United States, with 90% of exports historically going to that country. He announced today for countries without a free trade agreement with Canada, the tariff quota rate will lower to 50% of 2024 volumes to face tariffs. For free trade partners, excluding the United States, the quota for tariff rate in the industry will be 100% of 2024 volumes before facing tariffs. We did see a similar announcement, I believe it was a month ago. Canada, though, he also announced, will implement additional tariffs of 25% on steel imports from all non-U.S. countries containing steel melted and poured in China. And all of this is to be implemented before the end of July. He mentioned procurement practices will shift so Canadian steel products are used. That is just in part what we heard from the Prime Minister. I want to bring in the CBC's Karina Roman, who joins me now live from Ottawa. A lot to sort of take apart there. First, I want to focus on the announcement that was made, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the questions that we heard the Prime Minister tackle. So what did we hear in the supports announcement?
So really, if you need a general picture is from what was announced in June in terms of these tariff rate quotas, this is a tightening of that in response, I believe, to criticisms from the steel industry that what they announced in June didn't go far enough, especially in terms of the fear of other countries either dumping or pushing more steel into Canada at the expense of an already stressed domestic market. So when you talked about these tariff rate quota levels, so when we talk about, for example, non-free trade countries we do not have trade agreements with, instead of allowing 100% of the 2024 levels in before a tariff gets applied, now it's going down to 50%. So half of what was allowed in from those countries in 2024 will now be allowed in. Anything above that, a 50% tariff will apply. And then you have the non-U.S. partners, which with you do have a free trade agreement. There was some criticism that even ones we have trade agreements with are not necessarily good players all the time. So Canada will introduce a tariff rate quota level for steel products from these countries at 100% of 2024 levels. So they can increase their imports into Canada. And if they do increase it above that level, then they would also face a 50% tariff. It sounds like, and if people are wondering, hey, it sounds like we're not doing anything with the USA on this. We're not announcing some kind of counter tariff. As you know, steel products going to the U.S. right now from Canada face a 50% tariff. At this point, no changes to the counter tariffs that Canada puts on U.S. And as you mentioned, there is also going to be this additional 25% tariff on steel imports from non-U.S. countries that have steel products from China in it that's been melted and poured in China. And as you said, this all goes into effect before the end of July. There are additional worker benefits, and that is also a subject of criticism at this point, that there wasn't anything beyond the expanded EI that had been announced much earlier. So now there's additional money for worker supports, for strategic innovation funds. They're going to change and make it more flexible, this large enterprise tariff loan. This is to help companies with liquidity. It sounds like the changes they're making is to help beyond just very, very large companies and make it longer, the loan longer before they have to pay it back. And we've already heard this before, that they wanted to prioritize steel products in Canadian construction in these nation-building projects Mark Carney talks about. But it sounds like now they're making that an actual requirement when it comes to procurement.
Okay, so that is focusing in on the announcement that was made today by the Prime Minister to do with supports in the steel industry specifically. A lot of the questions, of course, had to do with the ongoing negotiations with the United States, and a question on whether or not the Prime Minister continues to have his elbows up. Of course, something that he campaigned on about softwood lumber as well, longstanding irritant with the United States, whether or not that will still be on the table, and counter countermeasures, which you touched on, whether or not we can see, an increase or intensification of those. What did he have to say on that front?
So what I took away from his first answer on do you still have your elbows up, working for the best deal for Canada, we've heard all that before, but when he said, it has to be a good deal for Canadian workers. Then he said that deal it has not been reached because so far it has not been on the table. That window into how trade negotiations are going right now is pretty clear. That obviously, as he said, they're tough negotiations. We don't have a deal because the deal so far that he thinks would be a better deal for Canada, even if it includes some tariffs, has not reached the table yet, has not been offered yet, or has they've not been able to get those concessions from the U.S. Now, that will still lead to more criticism because there are many who feel that it looks like Canada is giving a lot and not getting anything in return. But he was also asked about the counter tariffs. He pointed to the fact that there already are counter tariffs in place, but when pushed about whether we'll see further ones, there had been that discussion that the original date of July 21st, if we didn't have a deal, that would be when, depending on the progress of the negotiations, we could see more counter tariffs. Now we have a deadline of August 1st, but he says that we'll see whether there are further counter tariffs. Obviously, trying to really keep his cards close to his chest because he does not want to negotiate in public. So if he makes any kind of threat about counter tariffs, that could be taken a certain way at the negotiating table. If he says, oh no, they're totally off the table, well, that's obviously a concession. So obviously playing it very careful when talking to reporters about that. What was interesting, though, is he said, Canada still believes in free trade, and he talked about the benefits over the years, including at the company that he was there at, they're still going into U.S. buildings and how that's the benefit of full free trade, but that we have to adjust to the new reality. And the new reality is that the biggest, most powerful country and trading partner for us doesn't seem to believe in free trade anymore.
And it was interesting also to note, too, just a brief mention that, we had reports that Mexico's president says Carney is coming to visit. We didn't hear any questions to confirm that, but certainly we know that they did have a conversation. We saw the readout of that yesterday as well, saying that they are going to keep in close contact. And to Reuters news agency reporting there that our Prime Minister will be going over to Mexico, working to confirm that. But certainly we know the two countries are facing these tensions with the United States and, of course, the renegotiation to come, perhaps, of CUSMA or USMCA. Karina, thank you for all of this. That is the CBC's Karina Roman in Ottawa.